Hey everybody, we are going to explore a new way to solve quadratics in this chapter, or in this video. So we're going to start with a little exploration here though. What I've got here is 4 squared equals, and parentheses, negative 4 squared equals. And if you guys remember, 4 squared means 4 times 4, so that's 16. And negative 4 squared means negative 4 times negative 4, which is also 16. So we can see both of those numbers, 4 and negative 4, when I square them, give me the answer of 16. So when I'm presented with an equation where it says, fill in the blank here, what number squared equals 16, as you can see above, we're actually going to have two answers. Because the answer could be negative 4 squared equals 16, or the answer could be positive 4. So when we solve these equations here, what we're going to see today is we're actually going to be representing two different answers, a positive one and a negative one. Because when you square a positive or the same number negative, you get the same answer. So let's talk about this a little bit. We're going to call this method solving with inverse operations, or square roots. All right, is maybe the more simple term. Inverse operations are what you use to undo something. So when we have a little easy equation like x plus 3 equals 7, and you subtract 3 from both sides, you're doing an inverse operation because plus 3 and minus 3 cancel out. So we get our x equals 4. So that's the idea of square roots. A square root undoes squaring something. So we use this for a quadratic equation, and just to remind ourselves, a quadratic equation is when I have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Except specifically here, we're looking at quadratic equations that have no x term. So now I'm getting rid of this bx part. It's just going to be ax squared plus c. So a couple examples would be something like 3x squared minus 11 equals 21. Or it could just be something as simple as x squared equals 18. Notice there's no x term. There's an x squared term, but no x term. So our job in these is basically going to be two steps. We're going to try to isolate the x squared, and then we're going to square root both sides. That says sides, not rides. Square root both sides. All right, let's try a couple. So in problem number 1, I have x squared equals 144. The directions say solve. That's our whole goal here, for x. So I want to get the answers. What x values make this equation true? When I square the x value, I get 144. So from our little exploration at the beginning, maybe you're thinking 12 and negative 12. Okay, the way we're going to write that and solve this is actually by square rooting both sides. So I square root the x squared, and I square root the 144. And what that gives me is the square root of x squared is x. The square root of x squared will always be x, because the square root and the squared undo each other. They cancel out. So I get x equals, and then we said it could be positive 12, it could be negative 12. So we write this little symbol called plus or minus. And what that represents, it represents x equals 12 or x equals negative 12. So we can be a little efficient in the way we write it, just plus or minus, positive or negative 12. In number 2, I have x squared minus 36 equals 0. All right, and this is where we have to kind of shift our thinking a little bit. In the past, we said we always want the equation equal to 0. Yes, if we're going to try to factor it, or later we'll see using quadratic formula. But now, if I'm going to solve with square roots, and I can do that because there's no x term, I want to actually get x squared alone. So get x squared alone. So to do that, I'm going to add 36 to both sides. And so we get x squared equals 36. And now I'm kind of in that same spot as problem number 1. Let's square root both sides. So I get square root, and that gives me x equals plus or minus 6. Positive or negative 6. And there's my answer. Let's try a couple more. Number 3, we have 2x squared minus 11 equals 3. So here it takes a little bit more work to get the x squared alone. If it helps you, maybe box in the x squared or something. We're trying to get that piece alone. So just like all these other equations that we've solved for x, the first thing I do is add 11 to both sides here. You do the adding or subtracting before you do the dividing and multiplying. It's like reverse order of operations. So when I do that, I get 2x squared equals 14. And now I can divide both sides by 2, because it's 2 times x squared, so I'm going to undo it by dividing. And that's going to lead me to x squared equals 7. All right. To get x alone now, I square root both sides. Once you get x squared alone, that's when you go to the step of square rooting both sides. So just like we said before, the square root of x squared is x. Here, 7's not a perfect square. I'm not going to get a nice answer. So actually, all I do is just write plus or minus square root of 7. And that's the answer. Positive square root of 7 or negative square root of 7. That's the answer that solves this equation. Let's do a little check first to kind of prove it to you. So I'm going to check my answer. You guys know how to check an answer. You plug it in. So I'm going to do 2 parenthesis square root of 7. I'll just use the positive one. Squared minus 11. And I'm trying to check to see if that equals 3. So order of operations says I do the squaring first. So the square root of 7 squared. All right, well, if we did square root of 7 times the square root of 7, because that's what it means to square something, I'd get the square root of 49, which is 7. So I'm going to have 2 times 7 minus 11. Does that equal 3? 2 times 7 is 14 minus 11, which does equal 3. So that works. We'd get the same thing if we did negative square root of 7. So both of those answers work. All right, let's do number 4. We're going to divide both sides by 6 in order to get the x squared alone. So I divide by 6, I get x squared equals 48 divided by 6 is 8. I'm ready to take the square root of both sides. So we square root, and I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 8. Now this one has one more step to do because square root of 8 can be simplified. And if you remember, square root of 8 would be 4 times 2, root 4 times 2, and the square root of 4 is 2. So this is going to lead me to the answer, x equals plus or minus, we can't forget that, 2 root 2. Because the square root of 4 there becomes the 2 here. And then the 2 stays inside. All right, I think we just have 2 more questions. Number 5 says x squared plus 20 equals 5. And I have a little hint at the top here. At the top it says square root of something something squared equals negative 9. And we want to figure out what number could go in there. Well, if we think about 3 squared is positive 9, so that doesn't work. And then I could try negative 3, but negative 3 squared is also positive 9. So this type of situation, something squared equals a negative number, is no solution. No solution. It won't ever happen because you can't square something. You can't square a number and get a negative answer. So that's something we got to be on the lookout for now when we're solving these with square roots. If we ever try to take the square root of a negative number, it won't ever work. Or if we get x squared equals a negative number, it doesn't work. Okay, so another way to remember this is that you can't square root a negative. Can't square root a negative. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Don't do it. So number 5, let's do it. X squared plus 20 equals 5. Subtract 20 from both sides. We get x squared equals negative 15. So you might catch this there. Be like, I can't do x squared equals negative 15. There's no number that would work. So right away we could say no solution. But let's say you didn't catch it yet. You went square root, square root. Here's where you would notice, uh-oh, I've got the square root of 15. That's my surprised face there. Uh-oh, you can't do it. So there's no solution. And that's my sad face for no solution. All right, number 6 here. If you want, pause the video, try it yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to work through this one still too. What we're going to do here is get the x squared alone. I got to get this term alone, the x squared. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. And I get x squared over 3 equals 9. And then I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. I feel like it's been a while since we've done that, so this is good practice. You multiply both sides by 3, and we get x squared equals 27. And then from here, we're going to square root both sides. So I square root, and that leads me to x equals, and I'm going to notice right away that 27 can be broken down. 9 goes into 27. There's a perfect square. So I'm going to go plus or minus, because I don't want to forget that. Root 9 times 3, which is plus or minus 3, root 3. Okay. Some of you are getting to the point where you can look at root 27 and do the 9 root 3 part in your head. That's fine, as long as you're getting it right. Okay, so we'll expand on this in the next video to some different types, but that's all for now. Thanks.